roughly a minute, a time duration of 15 to 20 minutes. And then we'll have the question and answer session for today's broadcast. Mr. Waqas Moosa, who is the CEO of Hadron Solar. His topic would be the future of the grid in light of distributed energy adoption in Pakistan. Waqas sahab, you have the floor.
Thank you, Walid. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Let me just share my screen. Okay. So I'm going to move to the full screen. The topic of the discussion which I want to present, or the topic which I want to present, is a study which we conducted in collaboration with Lums Energy Institute. Some of the other speakers already referred to this area of distributed generation, specifically distributed solar. The idea of this study was to look at the challenges and opportunities presented by distributed solar in the Pakistan market. As we know, distributed generation is the new buzzword. It's something which we are hearing a lot about. It's a difference versus the traditional grid, where we used to have one producer and multiple customers or consumers. And now we have a situation where the production and distribution are taking place over multiple nodes in the network. So there are multiple producers and multiple distributors. And this growth in distributed generation, especially rooftop solar, because that's one of the biggest areas of distributed generation, has created a change in the traditional model of the business for utilities. And as we move forward, we're seeing more and more net metering, and we're also seeing the decrease in cost of storage, whether on-site or remote locations. And this will obviously further enhance the trend of adoption of distributed generation. We're seeing the same in Pakistan. We saw a few slides or a few statistics from the presentation of Mr. Ali Khan just before me, where we saw the growth of distributed generation in Pakistan. If we look at the whole solar picture from about 1 megawatt of installed capacity in 2016, we've reached more than 32 megawatts by 2019, and it's also growing further. And if we look at the cumulative installed generation capacity, we've almost reached 47.652 kilowatts by December 2019. We saw a statistic about the number of generation licenses which were issued by various discos on the distributed generators. And that's also been growing rapidly, and we're seeing a big uptake or a big increase in solar as well as other distributed generations in the market. So distributed generation is here to stay. It presents a lot of advantages in the market. We discussed a few of them. I'll just quickly go over a few more. One, of course, it's clean energy, because distributed generation is mainly solar and wind based. So there is a lot of pollution which we are facing in Pakistan, and that's something which will be helped by going for clean energy mix. It also supports the grid supply, because a lot of times the grid is already available. There is already the grid is already set, and there is already power coming into a place. So evacuating power out from there is not a lot of additional capacity or not of additional cost. Similarly, the next point of using existing infrastructure comes in place. Then there is less loss, because there is more local consumption of electricity in the same places where it's being produced. Another area is that because the owners are incentivized to produce more energy because they're getting paid for that energy, that also helps in this area. And the final area, which perhaps in Pakistan is not so commonly seen yet, but we're seeing it in other markets, where ancillary services, particularly when solar and storage are combined together, it really improves the quality of the electricity provided. We do have a lot of issues in the quality of electricity that we're seeing in Pakistan. We have voltage issues, and we have fluctuations. So some of those things can be managed through distributed generation. And also when it comes to peak demand management or suppressing the peak demand, that's something which we'll discuss further as we go along. So basically, we're seeing a lot of need for innovation. There is a new technology or new trends which are coming in the market, and we can see some, like other trends which came in and changed the market. So it's gonna continue to go in this way. Having seen this, or looking at this, we wanted to look at the impact this distributed generation is going to have on the industry in general, and specifically on the utility companies. So for this, we worked with LUMS Energy Institute, which is established as a think tank or a center of excellence, where multidisciplinary research can be conducted and presented by leading faculty members and industrial practitioners. This was headed by some of the founding members and directors of LUMS Energy Institute, Dr. Fayaz Chaudhary and Dr. Naveed Arshad. They can also provide further information. I will share the email address of Dr. Naveed Arshad by the end of the presentation for if there is any questions related to this study, and you can get some more information. But moving forward, I will present briefly the areas which were covered in the study. So we discussed the idea of how distributed generation came about, what are the benefits and what are the challenges of this. We looked briefly at the utility model currently in Pakistan and how things are being in place, and obviously keeping in mind that there are some initiatives which are already happening, specifically around the area where competitive pricing and competitive market is being established. LUMS Energy Institute is involved in that project, and there is some good progress on that. Obviously, we can hear further details from the regulatory side on that as well. So how these things will be affected by the distributed generation, and where things will go with that. We looked at global practices and what was happening around the world, because this is not a unique problem to Pakistan. Distributed generation increase is happening in Pakistan, but we are following some of the other markets in terms of the penetration levels. For example, in Germany, in the US, and specifically in states like California, in Hawaii. We're seeing this in China as well, where the level of solar and other distributed power generators in the overall energy mix is very high. So, so this is something which we looked at as well, and we tried to identify that from the various practices which are practiced in the world, what are the ones which will be more suitable for Pakistan, and how will that have an impact. The link to the study is given on this slide, and we will be sharing the presentations, and you can download the study and read through it yourself. I will now take one or two important points from there in the next couple of slides, and then I will finish my presentation. Before we sort of, just to give the idea of what's exactly the big issue which we're talking about, the biggest challenges which comes in, if you look at net metering from a consumer side, once solar is installed, you can see in this graph a 24 hours consumption and solar pattern for a particular site. And as you can see, the load pattern in this case is moving up and down throughout the day over the 24 hours. And in between, from about 6 a.m. in the morning to around 6 p.m. And I think this one is a typical day, and it's September. The date is September 2018. So it's a day where the sun is shining brightly, and there is a peak around the midday part. The graph is divided into two. The green part is the excess electricity which this particular site has exported to the grid, and the gray is which has been directly consumed. So this is looking at it from the consumer side, or from the customer of the electricity side. If we look at it from the other side, where we look at it from the grid side, we're seeing that on the grid side, it's almost reverse. Because the supplier or the utility company is seeing that around midday, the demand goes down as solar power increases. So we can see this graph, the full graph represents the full day's consumption over a particular set of communities or a community. And the dotted gray line represents what would have been the consumption without any distributed generation. And the yellow part in this case is the solar, which is taking away some of the demand. And the real demand which the utility is seeing is now the solid gray line, which is on the bottom. During the non-daylight hours, there is the dotted line and the solid line are the same. And during the daylight hours, there is a gap. Now, this is for one particular community or one particular area. If we start combining a lot of these curves together and putting them all together in one picture, we start getting something which eventually was named. This was a study conducted by a university or a research center in California, where they named it the duck curve, where you can see that as the level of solar penetration starts to increase, the belly of the duck, or the midday time where the demand is going down, starts to increase deeper and deeper and deeper. And one of the resulting issues is that a huge ramp up needs to be made at the time when the sun sets and the market is traditionally entering the peak consumption or demand time, as people are coming back home from work and turning on their TVs and their lights and their appliances. So this is an area which presents a challenge, that as distributed generation increases, in this particular case, they projected from 2012, 13, and then onwards, how the increased generation will result to the increase in the depth or the size of the duck curve which they're seeing. And then, of course, we looked in the research, or in our study, we looked at some areas of how we can mitigate the duck curve problem. So some of the areas which we explored, which have been various solutions have been tried in other countries, and we looked at some of them, and examples were presented about these in the study. One of them is investing in storage, so using storage to help to mitigate the peak which comes out. Investing in natural gas plants, which are generally able to play the role of peakers in the market. So that's something which was done by a few countries as well. There's some demand side management, having different tariffs or encouraging customers to use more electricity during the daytime. This is closely tied up to the electric vehicles area, where encouraging electric vehicles to charge during times when there is an anticipated low demand allows us to have a average, suppress the level of volatility in the overall full day consumption. Another area which was conducted in some countries, this was especially common in the European Union and also in the United States, where the grids are interconnected. So, for example, Germany can sell excess power to France, and California can sell excess power to the neighboring states. I believe it's Nevada over there, who can purchase some of the excess electricity in the times when extra electricity is available. So, number of solutions need to be adopted to solve these problems. And one of the things which clears up is that this is a it's a multi-stakeholder issue which needs to be clarified, or which needs to be worked on, and we need to work on it today so that we can resolve the issue in 4 or 5 years from now, because the planning of the grid is a long-term process, as we've been seeing in the recent days. Even in Pakistan, we're working on the plan up to 2047, for example. On the other hand, we're trying to create a solution or create a situation where the utilities don't fear something where once more and more distributed generation is installed and there is more and more smart grids, the utilities start feeling that they will no longer have a business model to run, or they will not have a business to provide, because as they provide, some customers go out of the grid, or some customers start using more and more distributed generation for their own needs, the remaining fixed cost of the system gets piled up on the remaining customers, and then that causes the prices to go up for them, and then that incentivizes more of them to exit the system. So this is sometimes called the utility debt spiral. So the idea is, how can we look at the solutions which we presented previously to get out of this utility debt spiral and create a business model where the utilities will be able to survive in spite of the increased distributed generation, or in fact using the increased distributed generation for their advantage. So moving forward, we've done the first study, and we're these days working on another critical study where we can now focus more on some of the specific solutions for the Pakistan market, and see which ones might have the best potential in light of the latest technology and innovations available. and what can be done to enhance the overall feasibility and the viability and the efficiency of the power sector in Pakistan. And then based on the results of that, pilot testing of some particular solutions can be done to determine feasibility and to perhaps share the results with other countries. It will be great that, you know, if Pakistan can take the lead in this area and create options or create solutions which can then be adopted by other countries who are following behind us in the adoption of green energy and the adoption of distributed generation. So it's a very exciting field. We are hopeful that we will be working on these other studies as we move forward and try to shape the future of the world as we see it, the new world as we see it. Leaving the last slide, you can again see the link to the study. In addition, you can contact myself by email as well as Dr. Naveed Arshad. Once you download the study, you can also get the email address for Dr. Naveed, and they will be able to answer any further questions. We will be able to answer any further questions if you have any ideas about future studies and how we can make the transition of distributed energy more practical and more efficient for the Pakistan market in general. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you again, Fakt, for organizing another great webinar. Over to you, Waleed.
Thank you, Waqas. Thank you for a detailed insight on what's happening currently in the energy sector of Pakistan.